Good morning or good day. Thanks for coming. For those of you who attend this live session, I appreciate you spend the time driving out here and attend this session. And for those of you who are on the internet, you're feel free to enter your questions during the presentations, and we'll try to address those questions in our Q&A sessions. Today, we have a very informative and very interesting seminar. We have invited Ken Lee, who was a Vice President in Development of Pacific Plaza, and Nancy, who is a Director at Pacific Alliance Bank, to come and share with us some very, education information. A lot of us real estate agents might get used to selling houses, but then there are times that you run into people who want to develop land or buy lands in this changing market. And these two speakers will give us some insights on what they have done in the past. Both of them have over 20 years of experience. So we can learn a lot from our speakers in this up and down market. And then it will help you to broaden your perspective should you decide to work with potential developers or somebody who wants to buy a piece of land and develop it. I have done some of this work, and I also look forward to learning from our two knowledgeable speakers on what they're going to share with us. So I'm going to have Cecilia now to introduce the speaker's bio. Yes, Cecilia, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Cecilia Nguyen of Coldwell Banker George Realty in Alhambra. Today, our commercial seminar, we have honor to invite two speakers, Ken Lee and Nancy Luke. Ken Lee is going to present real estate development perspectives in a continually evolving market. And Nancy is going to present tax treatments on build for rent versus build for sales. Ken Lee, he is Vice President of the Development for Pacific Plaza Premier Development Group, one of San Gabriel Valley's fastest growing private real estate companies specializing in mid-rise, mixed-use infill development. He leads the company's acquisition, entitlement, development, and asset management activities, and serves as the company's public liaison with the local governments and the public. Ken has more than 24 years of public and private sector experience and expertise in real estate, community development, economic development, housing and civic engagement for cities and private entities throughout California. And Nancy, she is a CPA since 1981, Director of Pacific Alliance Bank in San Gabriel since 2006. She also partner of Alliance Ever Inc., AEI, since April 2022, authorized distributor of Certified Emergency Power, CEP, system for elevator operations using lithium-ion battery. Nancy has graduated from National Taiwan University major economy, UCLA accounting, and also Golden Gate University MBA in taxation. Now let's welcome to our first speaker, Ken Lee.
Thank you, Cecilia. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Ken Lee. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. We're actually here because we did a similar presentation to the commercial agents and brokers for Coldwell Banker George Realty. That was back in May this year. And so Cecilia thought it would be helpful for us to provide a similar presentation to you all as well. I will say, just in the course of the last 4 or 5 months, a lot has changed. I mean, we're seeing drastically evolving changes in the market, obviously with the Feds and interest rates, what that means for banks and lenders and how that affects us. But it also, there's been a lot of evolution in terms of what's happening on the construction side in terms of material costs, supply chain shortages, everything that you hear that is global is definitely affecting us here in the San Gabriel Valley and affects us at our projects. So just a little bit more about my background. I have both public sector and private sector experience. I was a community development director for a city for a bit of time. I was economic development and real estate consultant for various cities, and also working with private developers. And then about, I would say now 7 years ago, I started working closely with this company. Some of you may know our president, James Chow, who is with Coldwell Banker George Realty as one of the owners. But over the last about 4 years, I've really come in to help build and scale the company. That's because we have quite a few projects I'll explain and go through some of the challenges that we're facing, as well as some of the success stories as well. So the other thing is we work very, very closely with Nancy on a day-to-day basis. She is the CPA for our company and our individual affiliate companies for each of our projects. We actually share the same office space, so we're constantly going to her office with questions and issues from a tax purpose and an accounting purpose. So just a little bit more about the company. We're in Alhambra. We actually also take up about 10,000 square feet of office space in the same building and complex as Coldwell Banker George Realty off of Garfield and Norwood. But we're a relatively small company, and we pride ourselves on that. We're not trying to become a mega company that takes over all of Southern California. We're very much focused on being a boutique firm that takes a certain strategic approach to how we accomplish our projects by surrounding ourselves with really high professionals that are doing expertise work for us. But we bring together a lot of experience over time, including James Chow's experience. He's been in real estate for over 40 years and has both brokered projects as well as developed industrial, hotel, commercial office, as well as mixed use and other residential. So we're pretty much a full service company. And so we're soup to nuts, all the way from acquiring a piece of property to entitling the property, obviously building it, the sales and leasing side as well. And we also do operations and management. So we have a property management arm of the company as well. So when we finish a project, we hand it off to our property management side. I'll explain a little bit more about the development process actually as I go to kind of set the stage. So it's tough to see the wording on that slide, so don't try to read it. I'll just explain that, when we talk about us being a San Gabriel Valley company, we are West San Gabriel Valley. So the fact that I'm here with the West San Gabriel Valley Association of Realtors is meaningful because all of our projects are in West San Gabriel Valley. So basically east of the 710, south of the 210, west of the 605, and north of the 60. So this really is our playground. We don't venture out of West San Gabriel Valley too far, and that's because we know the market. We know where our project locations make the most sense. And so you'll see a cluster of our projects in Alhambra, but right now we have about 9 projects, 3 of which have been completed, but we have other projects that are now under construction or in the approval process. And we are actively acquiring more properties right now. So we're growing at a very, very fast pace. So here's just a slide that shows some of our projects both completed, under construction, and otherwise, or renderings. So these are the pretty pictures, right, of 9 projects that we have in different phases of either completion or that are under construction. But, I'm here not to share and tout a bunch of pretty pictures and projects. I'm here to explain that there are stories behind these projects that are not easy, right? So some of our properties, you may be familiar with the San Gabriel Nursery. There's about 5.85 acres, almost 6 acres, that used to be the growing grounds for the nursery's wholesale operations. We purchased that property all the way back in late 2016. It's a long time ago. We only got entitlement approval for that project this past December. So it was a very long road to get there. And the entitlement process was very difficult, but the city was very supportive, and that made a huge, huge difference for us. But you have to understand that the process that developers have to go through to get these projects approved, there's a lot of risk involved at every step of the way. And so the way we approach these projects is to try to mitigate that risk as much as possible. Some of the other projects that you're seeing up here, we have 2 projects under construction right now in Alhambra. One is a 62-unit multifamily project with 20,000 square feet of retail and a parking structure attached to that. You'll also see on the right side, we just got our temporary certificate of occupancy for 84 multifamily units in Monterey Park. This is immediately adjacent to Atlantic Times Square, where the AMC Theater and the shopping center is. This is on Chandler, but on the Atlantic side, this is a mixed-use project where we have 84 units on the backside, but we also have a 136-key Holiday Inn and Suites that's still under construction. It will still be a year before we complete that, but we also have retail on the ground floor. And we just purchased, actually, 2 doors down from that Monterey Park project, another 1.3-acre property, which is a Happy Day preschool. Some of you may be familiar with it because actually there's been a lot of history. They've been in operation for a very long time, the husband and wife. I've met them, a terrific couple, very nice, but they were ready to basically close down the school. They're going to lease it back for the time being, but we're just now getting ready to submit our application for a multifamily project there. So even though things are chaotic in the market, we're not slowing down. And really the moral of the story there is it really depends on the location and how much risk we're willing to absorb when things are so turbulent. And I will tell you, things are turbulent with some of these projects. But let me, just kind of set the stage by giving you just a really quick snapshot. I've got a lot of slides here. I'm going to probably blow through some of them faster than others. But I want to explain development process, because as I talk about some of the challenges that we face in the development process, I want you to have some context for it. Right. So the basic steps is acquisition of the property, right? And this is really critical. We have to do proper due diligence. We have to do environmental testing. Most importantly, we have to make sure that the project economics work, right? So we build a financial pro forma, we do a residual land value analysis. What that means, residual value of the land. So when we know what it's going to take to build a project and we are projecting what our income is going to be, we have to back into what we think after profit and all the investors have been taken care of, what do we think we can afford for this piece of land? Let me just tell you, I'm not going to tell you the purchase prices of some of our properties, but let me just tell you, it just keeps going up. There's a scarcity of vacant land in San Gabriel Valley, especially West San Gabriel Valley. And everybody knows if you're going to build a project, you want to do it in West San Gabriel Valley, not East San Gabriel Valley. No offense to the East, but, but West San Gabriel Valley, so there's a very challenging scarcity of land. And so we've seen land values just continue to go up consistently over time. That means that it gets harder for us to make our project pencil, right? It has to economically still be viable. But that's why we spend a lot of upfront time making sure that as we're doing site selection, we're also addressing other risks. We have to work with the city staff very early. We always meet with them. We go over the zoning, what we can do, what we can't do, what the entitlement process looks like. And that is a huge part of our calculated risk of buying the piece of property. Because, once you buy the property, there's really no turning back. Otherwise, you're stuck with the property. And we've all seen around West San Gabriel Valley properties that have been purchased, that have been even entitled. So these projects are approved and then nothing happens. They just sit there. And some of the challenges is that there's risks that wasn't anticipated, or there's changes in the financial market. They can't get their construction loan. These are all issues that we have to try to anticipate to the best of our ability. I will say that we have a unique approach because of relationships that we have, not just with private equity and the capital for our projects, but especially with banks. If you do not have relationships with banks, you are never going to build a project. You have to have relationships with banks. You have to be able to guarantee these loans. That's a difficult process all on its own. But that's why sometimes you see. Don't try to read this slide. All I'm trying to show here is that every city right now is required to plan for more housing. Everybody's heard about the housing crisis in California. Housing, right? Which is why you see pictures like this. So some of you may have heard that Governor Gavin Newsom just signed more than a dozen pieces of legislation in the last couple of weeks targeted on housing, making housing easier, not to build, but to get approved. So what's happened is the state is saying to the cities, you're not doing your job. You're not approving projects for housing that we need, not just low income, not just affordable housing, market rate housing too. We need housing at every income level. But the state is consistently saying every year, if you look at legislation in the last 5 years, the state has been pumping legislation, right? Remember SB 9, right? The subdivision of the lots, and you can do a fourplex by right. It's all ministerial review. There's SB 35. We have a project that we're processing through that, where we have to make 1 unit affordable to low income, but the project then does not have to go through any discretionary approval, meaning we don't have any public hearings, right? We don't get attacked. We don't have issues with getting approvals. It just is reviewed by the staff to make sure it follows the rules. And then all of a sudden we have an agreement and we're done. It's beautiful. It took 3 months versus 5 years, right? You can see how time is a huge component of the risk for any developer. One other thing that I just want to point out in this picture, and it's no offense to Gavin Newsom, but you'll notice that you have these labor unions surrounded by him. That's because there's 2 very important pieces of legislation. I'm not going to talk about it today because it will take forever. That'll have to be a separate session. SB 6, AB 2011. Okay, both bills allow by right housing projects in commercial zones, like commercial corridors. Okay, it has to meet certain requirements, but it's by right. That means the city can't say no. Do you know why we're not going to build a project under one of those pieces of legislation? It's because of those guys actually standing around the governor. So there is a requirement in both bills that if you use that legislation, you have to use union labor or pay prevailing wage. What that means for us is our construction cost for labor goes up by at least 30%. That makes these projects harder and harder to build. So as much as they say, hey, we passed good legislation, we'll see how many developers want to actually build a project under that. Okay, that's kind of just a more recent updates of what's been going on. And I'm just going to blow through the rest of this. So obviously from acquisition, right, we've already started preliminary design, and then we go into actual design of the project. We work through issues with our architect, with our engineers. And then from there, we've submitted the project to the city, but more importantly, right now, you guys know what NIMBY is, not in my backyard. Housing is getting harder and harder to build because there's a lot of community groups that are now fighting projects. We were just talking about one of our projects that got denied in Alhambra not too long ago. I don't want to talk about it. I still have trauma from it. There were 4 hearings and picket signs, and it was very difficult, I'll just say. But community engagement is absolutely critical. And so the San Gabriel project, we spent almost an entire year just doing community engagement. That's interviews, meetings with focus groups, 2 workshops, and then we did a ton more after that once we submitted the application. It made a huge difference. The city council, in fact, denied some of the projects and said, why didn't you do community engagement like they did? Well, it wasn't easy for us to do, and it was a big time commitment. So out of that 5 years, one of them was just working with the community. Obviously, the land use entitlements. I'll just point out when I say land use entitlements, that's really the approvals from the city for the project. The one thing that is most critical from risk standpoint is the California Environmental Quality Act. Okay, now if we have a smaller project that's an infill project, we can actually be exempt from this environmental review process. That's a huge, huge deal because our larger project, like our San Gabriel project, we have to do a full-blown environmental impact report. That EIR took 2.5 years alone, just for the EIR, and more than $500,000. Okay, it was very expensive, very timely, and the reason is that, don't try to read it, I'm just showing you, it's a difficult process. It's complicated, and it exposes you to litigation. So if somebody doesn't like your project, they're always going to use CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, to potentially attack your project. All right, let's just say we've gotten our entitlements, everybody's happy, right? High fives all around. Then we get into the real work. So our architects, our structural engineer, our mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineer, our civil engineer, our lighting designer. So, we have like 12 different disciplines that then we have to coordinate to submit construction documents to the city. This can take typically a year because it takes you several months to prepare it, submit it, you get comments back and corrections, submit it, corrections back. It goes back and forth like a ping pong ball, right? Until you finally get to your permit then you're able to break ground and start construction, right? Obviously, most critically, what's happening while we're trying to get our permit is we're trying to get our loan, our construction loan to build the project. Again, if you don't have a construction loan, you don't have relationships with banks, you're not doing anything, right? You're not going to get off the ground because very few developers have access to cash to build with cash. And so just to give you an example, it was shocking to me that just when COVID started, so I'm talking about May of 2020, we were actually able to close a $35 million loan for one of the projects in Alhambra. That's a big, big loan. But there's no way if that bank said no, we're going to go find that in cash. No private equity party is going to say, oh, let me just put all of my cash at risk. That's why you use loans and banks, et cetera, because it's to mitigate risk. Okay, so once we're done with the project, right, then we have to move to occupancy. This is when we start working with the DRE. We do condo spec all our projects, by the way, but right now, this is what I am here to talk about. We moved from a for sale condo type of business model to for rent apartments. And there are tax purpose implications and reasons why Nancy's here to talk about that. But also it's the way the market is moving. Obviously what's happening with interest rates, everything is pushing more toward renters, but you know, there's only so much that the rent can go up, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. Okay, so the rest is sales, leasing, and then obviously we hand it off and we do the property management side, right? All right, so I just want to set the stage. Just what's happening right now on the multifamily side, right? So again, our market focus is here in the West San Gabriel Valley, but we are in both established markets that we trust and we know we're going to do well in. And there's some emerging markets, even in San Gabriel, right? And Temple City, but it depends where in those cities. Temple City right now, and I know Cecilia lives there, Nancy lives there. That city is terrific to work with right now because they're hungry for density, more housing. They want the projects, they want mixed use projects. And so we have found that it's been a really smooth process. The community is very, very receiving of our projects as well. That makes a huge difference. And most importantly, as we all know, the school districts are really going to drive, right, how viable some of these projects are going to be. So right now, Temple City is an excellent market for us to be in. But again, you know, it's a measure of risk. And as we're looking at, you know, sales comps and what we're seeing in terms of certain properties now, this is now, you know, a little bit old in terms of some of these comps. But, you know, we're looking at comps for our new projects. These are new housing units that are fairly high. But more importantly, what we're seeing with rents, right, is very, very critical. So most of the comps you'll see are up in the Pasadena area. So they're not exactly relevant to where our focus is. But you guys all know where the 88 at Alhambra Place is. So Garfield and Main Street, right, where Sprouts and Burlington Coal Factory. There's 260 luxury residential apartments. So I took a tour of the project. It's done by Shea Properties, very reputable developer out of Orange County, terrific project. I mean, this is a highly amenitized project, right? Not just because there's a swimming pool, but if you go in there, they've got these rooms that you can go in, you can study, you can sing karaoke in the rooms, you can play video games in the rooms, you can just hang out with friends in the rooms. But it's a terrific project, very well done, very high end, and they have very few vacancies. Okay, and so obviously the location is really important. It's next to downtown, close to retail amenities, right? People want to live there, and you know, when I visited, there were actually in the middle of the day a lot of people using the common area spaces. I'm emphasizing the amenities and the common area spaces because that's very important for us. If we're moving from a for sale product to a for rent product, what we do on the for sale side is very different than what you should do on the for rent side. And that's because on the for sale side, obviously for us as a developer who needs to sell the units, we have to be worried about what? HOA dues. If your HOA dues are too high, you're going to have trouble selling the units. If you keep your HOA dues down, guess what you're doing? You're keeping your budget down. That means you can't have swimming pools. That means you can't have a lot of these amenities that have maintenance costs that you have to be able to pass on through HOA dues. But now we're having to balance that, which is important. So just for you to get kind of a glimpse of I pulled this up actually back in May, and I pulled it up just again, just to see where the rents are. Back in May, they had a studio that was 575 square feet that was renting at almost $3,000 a month. I was like, what? Who pays $520 a foot for, a studio? But at the time, now I will say from May to now, the rents have actually started to settle down a bit. They were actually much higher, but you're still seeing for their one bedrooms, it's at about $4 a foot. Right? These are very high rents. These are it's a very highly amenitized project. So you have 2 bedrooms at more about $330, $335 a foot. But obviously when you're looking at a 2-bedroom, 2-bath at $3,844 a month, there's only a certain clientele that you're really targeting there. But like I told you, they have very few vacancies, which is amazing actually. And I do think that the location is important. I just had to show that there's a 3-bedroom unit that's $4,700 also. So this is important for us to also understand, because when we're looking at what's happening over time for sale prices, median sales prices versus rent, we're seeing rent climb faster than sales prices. And we all know this slide is old, because in the last 5 months, that median sales price is going down very drastically because of what we're seeing with interest rates. And so this is a slide that I pulled together just late last night. This is the construction cost index for California. And I'm showing you this because when we're looking at our pro forma and whether the project makes financial sense, we have to look at the trend of not just what's happening with sales prices and rents, but obviously what does it cost for us to build the project, right? And so over the course of the last, let's say 21 years, the average year-to-year increase in construction costs has been 3.3%. That's an average. Now you'll notice there were some spikes, right? And we all know when that happened, which was like early 2000s, right? Which was the big boom before the big recession, where you see that negative 1.1%, right? So there has been actually reductions in overall construction costs as well over time. But, in the last 18 months, it's been very, very painful. We all know inflation has been around 9%. Well, guess what? From December of 2020 to December of 2021, we had a 13.4% increase in average construction costs in California. If you look at where we are today, as of September, I looked at from December 2020 to September of right now, 20.8% increase in construction costs. So we are struggling with this. We had even some small industrial projects we're looking at doing in the Inland Empire. I think those projects are dead because we met with a contractor. They're looking at a 40% increase in cost from when we first started the project to now, and we haven't even broken ground. So this is a struggle, right? Because when you're in mid-construction, we have to work with our contractors because somebody has to be able to absorb the cost. Well, that always means change orders for the developers, right? So our pro forma has to have some contingency, but I guarantee you, nobody has a 20.8% contingency in their budget for construction costs. And a lot of this is because of materials. But what's even worse is costs are going drastically up. I'm sorry, I'm such a downer today on this. Costs are going drastically up. Here's kind of the bigger problem. You can almost figure it out financially. What you can't figure out is when you have a supply chain problem and you can't get your electrical panel for more than a year. That's a problem. That means that we can be done with construction. We can't do anything. We have no electricity because we don't have an electrical panel, right? So that's just one example. I mean, on industrial projects, roof trusses, which, are it holds up the roof. That's over a year out as well. So we are seeing a global issue in terms of materials and supply chain problems that is creating problems from us from a schedule standpoint. And so, forget about the carrying costs. Just the fact that we can't get to product completion can be a big problem. So that means that we have to be very adaptable and fluid as we go through this. Okay, I've been talking for most of the time. So I'm going to hand it off, but I do want to just show you one project because this is immediately east and across the street from the other project I was showing you that Shea built, 88 at Alhambra Place. So they have 260 luxury residential units that are apartments. And this project is across the street. It's 62 units. These are going to be high-end units. We have actually large penthouse units that are 3 bedrooms on the top floor that'll have like private rooftop patio, etc. This is actively under construction. So 62 units, 20,000 square feet of retail. But this was originally designed as a condo project. So everything I was explaining to you before about the amenities, about the cost, about keeping HOA dues down, when it's designed as that, it's hard for us to pivot midstream, especially when they're under construction, to be able to provide amenities that you would typically see in an apartment project. So, you know, what that means, I'm just going to be flipping through this as I talk. This is just progress photos of the construction and, you know, that went. So what that means is that we're not going to be able to command the same rents, right, as the 88 project at Alhambra Place, right? Because we don't have the same level of amenities. That's extremely critical when you're talking about rent. But we are in an excellent location. So we're constantly evaluating where we are going to be in terms of rent, where this project's going to be positioned, who we're bringing in as tenants. We made a very conscious decision on about 14,000 square feet of the retail to not do restaurants and retail because of its location. It'd be very hard to lease up. We have a single medical tenant that actually is very progressive in their field. That's going to be helpful. But, you know, the course of these projects to get them, again, back to the timeline, get them approved, get the permit, and then construction, obviously, right? Because construction's never smooth. You're always going to run into some issues, and then you have to continue to work through the city through the entire process because you may hit hiccups, and it's constantly troubleshooting is what we're doing and working with the contractors. So we meet at our projects every single week without miss. We never miss a meeting unless it's a holiday like Christmas. But you know, it's a long road to get there. So, and what I'm showing you here is you'll see there's a private courtyard there. But again, I can't fit a pool in that courtyard now, right? Now that we're switching to apartments. So these are some of the considerations that we have to look at, both in terms of the product that we're building and that we're going to rent or sell, but also all of the risk and pain points that we have to endure along the way. And we do get through it. Trust me. I mean, we are not going to be a developer that's going to get these projects approved and just sit on them. So we perform on our projects, but you know, as the cycle changes and it goes up and down, we have to be able to ride through those waves. That's absolutely critical. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Nancy.
Thank you, Ken. Very valuable and informative presentation, isn't it? Okay, let's welcome Nancy for her presentation on tax treatments on bill for rent versus bill for sale.
I don't think I need to convince you. After Ken's very informative presentation, you probably already know what the rent.
Is that my point? I guess so, right?
Well, especially rental market is so well nowadays. It's worth it. Just like James, he mentioned that James, the first project is it's 300 Main. That time they had sold it, but after that they sold it. All the partners complained. They said, "You telling me I have to pay 50% of my taxes or my profit sharing with Uncle Sam?" So nobody's happy. So that, but then now you know you want to rent, but you still want to know why, because you are a developer. You know, I guess if you're a developer, then you are just like making a product. You know, you are in tax law is all based on intention. Just based on intention. So if you intend to develop this property, just like you have just like you're earning your income, it is an ordinary income. So that means that if you're making a $1 million profit, it can go up to, like federal can go up to 37%. Let me try to do this. Okay, your federal could up to 37% percentage. California, another 12.3. You're talking about 50% here. So that means that 50% of your profit you're gonna share it with the government. So, you just hear Kent tell you all the hassle, all the jump you have to go through before you're able to complete the project. You're not gonna be ready to share 50% profit with Uncle Sam, right? So now, but then you are the developer. You have no choice because it is your product. You're selling inventory. So you cannot just say, I'm an investor. You're not. You've gone through 4 or 5 years to develop a property. That is your intention to develop. So now, if you're an investor, if you're buying a piece of property, that property, you just rent it out. That's investor. It did not go through all those hassle. So sometimes investor probably prefer just buying a property, just like you guys can help them to get the property and rent it out, rather than have to go through all the entitlement, all those time, and you have to borrow money from the bank. But sometimes, like development, easy said and done. Even though we said we want to rent, how do you pay back the construction loan? So that is a thing. Unless you rent it all out, which is very fortunately under Ken's leadership and the George Verity and all those people, they can rent it out pretty quick because they have good location. Location is the most important thing. And like Ken said, it's hard to find those land anymore. If you sell it, you no longer to replace it. So very often we just rent it out. And it's just a logic thinking. So that is the reason I think, besides that, the way they're building now is they left, for example, like 2 bedrooms. They build 2.5 bedroom. So that means, let's say it's $2,800 or $3,000 for 2 bedroom. And very often it's 2 friends sharing the apartment, sharing the condo, like $1,500 a piece. That was easy to done, right? Rather than you pay $3,000 because you have 2.5 bath, you have your own privacy, you're sharing the apartment. So the way you structure, the way you build is important too. So because the people, often people, they're just sharing especially young people nowadays, they're sharing the apartment. Each one $1,500 reasonable. So that is how they go by it. And I think, it's a very simple. Like I told Ken, it took me only 5 minutes to get my topic done. Okay, now I'm let's see. That's why I add another topics. This topic is how to hold your title on a real property. Very often, I've seen people, when they're preparing that tax return, we look at their property tax bill and how do they hold the property is very important. You have to know the consequences. Now, the first one is that most of the time we see it as a joint tenant, the rights of survivorship. You look at the rights. So the joint tenant, the 2-person, but basically this one's for the couple, husband and wife. So the first one to die, the second one, the surviving spouse has the rights to inherit this property. The second one, because of California is a community property state. So many years ago, we just changed it that you can call as a community property with rights of survivorship. So what's the difference between these two? Joint tenants, when we die, all the property is going to reappraise to the date of death. And but in the California real estate market, usually we're going up. So we call step-up basis. Then, even joint tenant, the one who died receive the step-up basis. The one surviving still maintain the old cost. If you're a community property with rights of survivorship, then both sides will step up. So you can tell the differences. So if you sell the property immediately after the first one died, If you are joint tenant, you're gonna pay some taxes. But if you're a community property, you don't need to. So that is the reason it's so important, the title, the holding. Because all the title, it doesn't make any difference when you're alive. It only happens when you die. One of them tenant die. So that is the reason it's very important to go back to look at your property tax bill. And also it's good knowledge and goodwill you give it to your client when they buy the property from you. You guide them what property title to hold. Now, the problem is with this two title holding is that what happened when the survivor died? Who's going to inherit the property? And in California or the United States, if you die, you don't know who's going to inherit this property. And the court is going to take over that to decide it for you. So you have to probate. And that could be very expensive. You had to pay the referee fee. You had to pay the court to decide who is going to inherit the property. So that is the reason now you need to go to I'm not very good at this. Okay, now that's why you use a living trust. You go to a living trust will tell after you die who is going to inherit this property. So that means that very often people they have a create a living trust, but they don't change the title on the property. I have seen some of my clients. The husband died and they have a living trust beautifully done, but the property title is still like joint tenant. Or maybe even they don't have the joint tenant, the first one died, has no problem. But the thing is that you don't know who's going to inherit on the second die. So it's even though you have living trust, but if you don't put the title on the property, it doesn't make any difference. If you have a joint tenant or maybe the property will write a survivorship, you have a living trust into somebody else, you can do. Because your title on the property is whoever on the title, they have the right to inherit this property. So therefore, you don't want to put the joint tenant with somebody else beside your spouse. Another thing you want, the reason you want to have a living trust is what happens if very often people say, well, okay, after the first time, I will do it after, in the first time. But what happens if both of them die at the same time? I have seen clients, they go to Las Vegas and come back with an accident and both gone. So that's why you have to prepare, be sorry. So now, what happened to the tenant? The fourth one is the tenancy in common. If you want, those the first three is only reserved for husband and wife. But if you have someone, you want to have a, investment with your family member or friend or whoever. So you maybe want to have tenancy in common. And very often, people who have some property, let's say partnership, and one you want to sell it, one wants to do 1031 exchange, the other one wants to sell it. So what do? If you have an LLC or partnership, you want to do 1031 exchange or you want to do sale, you have to do it all together. You cannot do, oh, I do this, he does that. Unless you are the tenancy in common, each one of them you have the right to do whatever you want to do. So very often people who have an LLC or partnership, they planning ahead of time to dissolve that partnership and then distribute the property to that tenancy in common. Then you can do whatever you want. So that is planning have to continue on to see what happens. Now, the last one is LLC. LLC is usually for people who has a real estate. Nowadays, we look at everybody is in real estate or always using an LLC. The LLC is a limited liability company. And we have two or more partners and form an LLC. You all by yourself, and we call single member LLC, you also can form that as an LLC. The reason you have LLC, just like saying you have limited liability. But if the two or more is a partner in tax law, partnership is a two or more person. If you're one single person, that is not partnership. So if you have a 2 or more partner, you have to prepare federal and California partnership return. And then you have the list of all the income, expenses, and then you issue a one to each partner. But if you are a single member LLC, you're not partnership. The federal said you're not required to file federal return. But California said you do have to, some California said you do have to pay $800 minimum tax on gross receipt fee. So you just tell them what the gross receipt and pay $800. You can have a less than $250,000 gross receipt, you'll be fine. But husband and wife, very often, husband and wife name, you can treat it as a partner or you can treat it as a single person. So it depends on what you want to do. So very often, the couple will usually determine just apply as a single member because you don't want to do all those partnership return, list all the income expenses. But if you're a single member, all the income expenses are listed on your individual tax return because it belongs to you. So that is on your Schedule E. So then it's easy. Don't have to show all the asset and the liability. The less reporting is better. So that is an LLC. Then why people using LLC? Okay. Now, limited liability. We both have a limited liability for LLC. Some people also maybe use an S corporation because an LLC and S corporation, you don't pay tax on the federal level. And then all those are distributed to the partner or shareholder to pay the taxes. Then they're all the same. But the difference between LLC and S corporation is a charging order. So, okay, that means LLC has a yes for charging order. S corporation is no. But what does that mean? Okay, charging order. If you hold a property under S corporation, the creditor sue you. And they are not only have an economic interest in your corporation, so they also have a voting right. So that means if they come in to sue you, and they can, if they have more than 51%, they can vote you out. They can even sell the property without your consent. So that sometimes creditor, like even the corporation, you have limited liability, but if the creditor sue you, you still get hooked with it. But if the LLC in California, they say you have charging order, they have an economic interest in the property, but you have no voting right. So that means they don't have that right to vote you out. Okay, so that means that if they want to become your major partner, let them pay the taxes. But you don't distribute the money to you. If they distribute the money to you, then they can go after you. But if you keep the money within the LLC without distribution, they cannot do anything about it. So that is the reason most people, they will use an LLC because that is not, that's why all the creditor, it doesn't want to sue LLC. It can't get anything. So that is the reason is people using an LLC for that. So right now, actually, LLC holding for real estate is one of the public assets protection. So you protect your assets. So that is a good one. I don't know. I still have a lot of time left, right? But I'm already finished. But at the end, I'd like to share this with you. Currently, I'm reading this book. We call it Limitless. This is by Jim Quick. When he was little, he suffered a head injury. So he has a learning disability. So, the kids made fun of him, bullied him. Even his teacher was so frustrated with him. So called him the boy without a brain. Well, the boy with a broken brain. So he spent the next 2 decades to learn how to work on his brain, how to improve his brain. So today, he is well-known brain consultant and a coach. He teach U.S. military and he teach celebrity, CEO, UA, and he's teaching is throughout the world, 195 countries. You know, so he is, I thought he is Asian, whether he's Chinese or not, I'm not sure. Wait, but you know, so he's a thing. We all learn what to learn, but we never learn how to learn. Right? We only say what to learn, but he teaches you how to learn, how to use your brain to work for. He try to work how to work on the brain to make your brain to work for you. So there's we'll say we hear the phrases that knowledge is power, but you are really using the learning. The learning is our superpower, and our capacity to learn is really limitless. And I want to congratulate all of you here and out there, and be here, on a regular basis to learn new knowledge and to learn new soft powers, to enhance your knowledge, and you make a choice in your life to become luminous.
Thank you so much, Nancy. You not only share her professional and also share what she read. So, here is a question for Ken. Yeah, regarding finance. The question is, said that if the agent is working on a few ground-up construction loans for mixed-use projects, under the current environment, how does your company or GSS navigating cost, inflation, and supply chain issues? Is cost overrun still very common? That's the question.
Yeah, I have a feeling that question may have come up before I showed the slide with the 20.8% increase and my cautionary tale about supply chain issues. So yes, absolutely. I mean, we're probably at the peak of some of these issues with supply chain and cost overruns. I think part of the question had to do with land. Now, one of the approaches, and every developer in terms of their capital stack and how they approach their projects from a financing standpoint, there's basically a financial strategic approach that each developer will take. For us, what's really important is we purchase land and we pay for all soft costs. That means all consultants, architects, engineers, the environmental impact report that was $500,000. All of that's paid with cash. So that's the investment, the ownership group with all the investors and the partners that is putting up the cash for that. Why is that important from a financing standpoint is that reduces the loan to cost ratio for the banks. That's a significant reduction in risk for the banks to be able to finance these projects and underwrite them. That's really critical. But even then, right, we go through a very important process with the banks to work with their underwriters to make sure that they understand the project inside and out. But yes, all of these factors come together and play, which is why we have a financial pro forma model that we're constantly updating with all the changing factors from a financial standpoint.
She also wants to know if you can share how are your current projects being financed? What does your typical capital stacks look like? I think you mentioned.
Yeah, as I just mentioned, typically, there's a general partner and there are limited partners, right? So the general partner and the sponsor, which is really my boss, James, he's really the sponsor of the project. And so you got to remember that not only is he putting cash into the projects, but he has to shoulder all the risk, meaning that the entitlement risk and getting the approvals, but also the risk with the lenders. And so if he's personally guaranteeing his loans, you have to imagine what burden and weight he carries on his shoulders. So the capital stack from that standpoint is important. But again, I think I already answered the question, but On the lending side, it's really just the hard costs. So there's soft costs, hard costs. Soft costs is like fees and permits and everything that you pay to the cities and all the government agencies, and then your architectural, all your consultants. That's all your soft costs, and that's typically about 35% of your total project cost. So the hard cost is just our construction cost with our contractors. And so that's the only point that we're doing our financing with the banks. And then once we complete the project, if it's for rent, then we'll have to move to takeout financing to convert it into a permanent loan over time.
Thank you so much. I know today the time is very limited, so let's keep up some topics for next year, okay? Please come next year. And if now in person, if you do have some question you want to ask, you can come up. Otherwise, it's not easy to make appointment with them, okay? Okay, thanks again.
Thank you, Cecilia. This is how I want to do it. There's some Q&A questions from the people who are on the internet. Please send them to us now through the chat room. So I can, take care of some of your questions because the speakers' times are valuable. For those of you who are here, since we're going to go into a little lunch session, if you want to stay and the speakers are kind enough to hang with us for 10 or 15 minutes, then we can still ask those questions while we're having lunch. So for those people who are on the internet, do you have any questions that you want to raise? Please feel free to send it to us. And for some of you who might have questions, you can raise your hand too, but I want to take care of the people on the internet first.
And also, if today you missed today's seminar, later on you can go to Western Gateway Board, the website, and review it.
Okay, maybe I have some questions to Ken. Do you run into issues that you might have a cost overrun? Let's say, as I understand, I'm a little GC myself, I don't do projects that way. So let's say the project initially projected at $15–20 million, and all of a sudden, in between the process, you see some of those costs overrun that it might be at 10 or 25 million. But do you talk to the bank and say, I need additional funding?
That's a really good question. Very difficult to go back to the banks to get more money. So typically no. So that means that there's a careful dance between between us and the contractor in negotiating what that change order is going to look like. And we all know, a couple of years ago, you remember the lumber perfect storm?
Yes.
And then steel came next, and now, I mean, it hasn't gone away. In some materials have gone better versus others, but it's not labor costs. It's all materials costs that we're working with right now. So it really is outside of the control of both the developer and the contractor, which is why our relationship with our contractors is important, how we negotiate with them. And if we're able to go back to the banks, that's great, but very, very difficult.
So how do you deal with those additional costs? I mean, I used to manage billions of dollars of project budget similar to what you're doing.
Well, so in an ideal world, the only cash that we do spend is soft costs and land costs. But if we can't get any more money from the banks, it's got to come out of somebody's pocket. So it's just an additional cash contribution that has to go into the project.
Oh my goodness. So you go back to the partnership and ask for additional funding.
Correct.
On Nancy's scenario, is it worthwhile at the end of the project instead of sharing part of the money with Uncle Sam? And I can see the tax rate very high. So actually, it might be prudent for us just to own the project outright as a rental property. Is that where the trend is going?
Well,
because we don't have to pay the upfront capital gain.
Well, the capital gain, is federal is 23.8%. And California has no capital gain rate, so they just are regular. But if you rent, even though it's still ordinary income, but the income will be less. On top of that, you have a depreciation on the building you have. So really drastically reduce your net rental income so that you bring your taxable amount or tax bracket lower. So usually most people will pick up for as a rent. And hopefully you hold it for a long period, long enough let's say 5 or 6 years, and you can convert that intention from the developer into a investor. So that means at that time, maybe you can, when you sell it in the future down the road, that could maybe become a capital gain.
One of the other factors that I failed to mention earlier is anytime you're doing for sale condos, you're taking on a whole nother level of risk with construction defect litigation, which the statute of limitations is 10 years, right? And so a lot of times you end up with sometimes even, your structural engineer doesn't want to work on your project, your contractor doesn't want to do it, right? Because there's exposure to liability. So you have to get wrap insurance or wrap up insurance. That cost for wrap up insurance has doubled over the last couple of years. It's getting very, very expensive to get wrap up insurance. But I do want to say, even though we've made some shifts in our business model, there are plenty of for sale developers that are still doing a lot of good work. I recently met with the Olsen Companies, who has done a lot of typically 3-story townhomes all throughout San Gabriel Valley. But their business model is very different because at a corporate level, they are able to create a system where from a tax standpoint, et cetera, they have the right strategies in place that makes it beneficial for them. So it depends on the type of company that you're really running.
Good. One suggestion from Eileen, who is a loan officer, and she suggested, is it possible just to get a second GD at the end? Should we feel that projects is running a little bit more money at the end of completion so we can refinance? Would that work?
I don't know, we haven't done it.
Well, you're good at managing your money, Ken. Sometimes I do when you do that type of stuff.
I mean, typically, I'm typically not that involved on the financing side because I'm really focused on just getting the project built. But I mean, these are considerations that we are constantly working with Nancy and the banks and our other advisors on as well.
So most of the time when you finish the project, you just pay everything, including besides the soft cost upfront and then also hard cost at the end.
Correct.
Good. You're good. You're a good man. Any questions from the audience?
Well, you want to answer?
We'll both answer. It depends. And so we do have different, syndicated investment goals for each project. So it really depends on the long-term goals of the investors. That's why the capital stack in terms of who you bring in as investors and you having like-minded goals for either long-term, midterm, or short-term is all going to be very important. We try to build in as much flexibility as possible. I don't know if everybody heard the question that's online, but the question was, what's the end game goal, right? Are you looking to build it, have an apartment project and then sell it, right? So, work with your cap rates and, increase the value and the rents over time and then sell it once you get it stabilized and leased up. But right now for us, the current goal is long-term hold. It makes sense for these particular investors for them to do long-term holds, but that can change. Much like Nancy was sharing about other LLCs and partnerships, goals always change because life circumstances change, and at that point, they have to come to agreement on at some point, do they want to convert them into condos and sell?
Yeah, I can add up to that too, because if you buy a property, each condo, each apartment is a separate grant deeded. So that means you could probably own even it's a 20, 30 or 50, 60 complex, you still have you still own each had its own separate grant deed, right? So you can sell if you want to sell one or two, just that piece of property. And because very often the investors they say, oh, I want to use my investment to own my share of this condo. So that means that especially nowadays, we work with the attorney very closely to see how to do properly.
That's a good point. So it depends on how you structure the partnership once you complete the project. You could actually, like Nancy was saying, you could have the ownership structure based on units. So we had a 79 townhome project built in Alhambra, completed last year, 4 different lots, 4 different phases. So the ownership pattern today is that some investors own some lots and some investors own other lots. Now, the thing is, if you do anything other than a bulk sale of those condo units, right? Meaning if it's less than 5 units that you sell, 4 or less, you have to activate the HOA. So that's a significant consideration for us, because do you really want to activate an HOA for just a couple of units? You got to do the whole project if you're going to do that. That's important for me, because guess who gets to sit on the HOA board as a developer for 3 years? I don't want to sit on the HOA board for 3 years. I have enough meetings that I have to deal with.
I have a question, Ken. I see that you want to spend a lot of time liaison with different government agencies, and you also spend time with the communities. Can you give me maybe an example of why the community opposed to building a project which is good housing projects for the communities?
I mean, every community is a little bit different. Some of the community groups that we've worked with, you know, a lot of times you have stable single family neighborhoods, right? And so they have their quality of life, their way of life, et cetera. And, you know, when the not in my backyard issues come up, typically they'll always point to what? Traffic. Always say, oh, more traffic, more traffic, more traffic, which is somewhat accurate, but it's not. So really it depends on where this density is going to go. But I think in general, there is probably misperceptions about the impacts of these projects. The reason that you do more density and you create mixed use environments and you put employment next to housing is to reduce regional traffic, right? And so we all know in San Gabriel Valley, like Valley Boulevard, people are on Valley Boulevard because they don't want to be on the 10. And so it's that type of regional issues, but they're only looking at it immediately what's in front of them, right? And so it becomes a very emotional issue. They do feel like sometimes developers are taking advantage of those communities. It's important for us not to just go in, build a project and get out. I mean, we become part of that community, and we try very hard to work with a lot of the community organizations to support them as well.
But the government officials are a little bit more receptive to having more housing units to ease the housing crisis.
That's a very good question. I was just on a planning call this morning for a regional housing summit for the San Gabriel Valley. I'm a board member of the San Gabriel Valley Economic Partnership. Yes and no. I mean, it just depends on the community. And so you'll run into some city councils where it's a mixed bag. Some are pro housing, some don't want any more housing. And some have been very intentional from a long time ago that they don't want growth. But if you look at the numbers and what California is projecting as far as housing need, it's got to go somewhere, right? And so guess what? If you run out of land, you got to go vertical. It's the only thing you can do. That's why these commercial corridors are important, and why the legislation was just passed around these commercial zones, particularly along these main commercial thoroughfares. So the question was related to inclusionary housing ordinances, right? And so I have found it interesting in West San Gabriel Valley, there are not many cities actually have these ordinances in place. So the question was, you know, if you have to do inclusionary units, meaning, so typically an inclusionary housing ordinance, like the one that Alhambra just passed not too long ago, says, if your development is over X number of units, then 15% of the units that you build, so if it's 100 units, 15 of our units have to be affordable to low and moderate income. And it's 9% low, 6% moderate, so that's 15%. If we build those units, it's not just that you build them and they're affordable housing, they're deed restricted, right? And so the important part to understand is that there's a whole separate qualification process for those tenants, and how they manage that qualification process and application process is very, very important. So it's not just that you want to say, well, I don't want a market rate unit, I want the cheaper unit. You also have to qualify. And so there's an entire formula based on the county median income of how to qualify, whether it's low income, moderate income. It could be very low income. So that becomes a mixed income property and community actually, which is actually a good thing. But, you know, there's a reason that there are really top-notch affordable housing developers in California. I've worked with a lot of them. National Core is a big one that's in West San Gabriel Valley, very active. They'll sometimes do mixed income properties. We're a market rate developer, right? And so if the city will allow us to also pay an in lieu fee, instead of doing those 15 units, then we will probably opt to pay the fee. What happens is that fee goes into a housing trust fund for the city, and then they use that, right? We just talked about how land is expensive. They'll use that to potentially save up enough, purchase property, and then they can turn around if they have the right government entity in place. They can sell it for $1 to affordable housing developer. That's important because affordable housing projects are very hard to finance.
Okay, I want to conclude this meeting, and if you got a question, you might save time while having lunch and asking for the speakers. Thank you to both of you for giving us a very informative and educational meeting.
Thank you for having us.
For both of you too. For those of you who are interested in some of our feature session, I just want that come days. October 18th, we have got a mobile home. So if you are interested in selling mobile homes, attend our October 18th sessions. And on November 15th, next month, we have a topic called home hardening. So which is coming out of Assembly Bill 38. For those of you who wants to learn a little bit about representing buyers, we have got a class in October 25th, 26th, it's 2-day live class, and I've attended a class. Jeannie Field is the instructor who is hosting that class. And if you want to attend, look for the flyer from Plum. So those are the classes we are coming. I hope you guys have enjoyed today's session, and I certainly learned a lot from both of you, and thanks for giving us your valuable times to all of us. Thank you for coming today. Thank you. And lunch is served.